Excuse me. Okay. So, pitch hip width apart then. Weight a little bit forwards, just letting your hips drop back. And just this overall sense of settling. We call it sitting in to the hips, and it should feel like you're, the kind of feeling inside when you sit down in a chair, and then just turning from the middle of your body. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. Letting the front of your body be supported by your back. The whole of your upper body, of course, supported by your legs. But also, if we think about this idea of an inner structure, an inner strength, you could think of the skeleton, think of that denser feeling as you sort of travel inwards in your body. Outside, the softness of cotton, inside, the temper of steel. If I get this bottle with water in it, the first couple of millimeters I push in are really quite easy. I mean, more and more resistance, but never a hard resistance. So whatever kind of idea or image works for you, try and get a sense of what we might think of as the outer regions of the body, say your shoulders, sinking into that inner strength, that inner structure. So an increasing sense of being supported and having a certain amount of confidence in that support as well, because of course with that confidence comes the ability to release more. Turning in the middle of your body, the feeling of pulling on your arms. Big muscles of your arms, like here, for instance, the muscle there, the muscle cut the name of, it's inserted there and there, but in the middle it hangs down. It's still quite strong, it's still being used, but it's not rigid and tight. And that's a quality you want to try and develop all the way through your body, in the muscles of your back and the chest and legs and so on. And it's probably easier to get a sense for what you're looking for in that aspect with your arms, because there's no way that they're weight bearing, and particularly in this exercise they're not having to do anything, so you can get a kind of mental impression of what it is you're looking for. Most of the rest of the body, there'll need to be a period of conditioning of the muscles. So if the muscles of your legs aren't quite strong enough to maintain this position, you can maintain it, but you're right at the limit of the muscle. Inevitably they're going to harden. They need to condition a little bit more so that this position is well within their capacity. It's like if you drive a car and you drive it at the absolute top acceleration, the car will be shaking and screaming and things like that. Whereas if most cars, the speedometer goes up to 120, so 40 or 50 miles an hour is coasting along. It's the same kind of principle, and it's important to consider that, because I think we often overlook the fact that Tai Chi conditions our body in a particular way. And then raising your arms. And again, we want to feel that, if you can think of something like a suspension bridge, where you have maybe the structure of the bridge going out over the water, whatever it is, and the steel cables are really tight and taut, but they'll have some kind of curve in them. So it's a balance of forces rather than a part of the body supporting or a part of the arm supporting. And this adds that dimension to the phrase, when one part of your body is in motion, your whole body is in motion. What it really means, I think, is that one way or another, your whole body is part of what's happening. It's clearly not the case that your whole body is actively in motion, otherwise you'll be flying through the air, wouldn't you? Your whole body is very much engaged. Let your hands drop down. So just letting your weight roll forwards and backwards, and try and get a sense of this happening in your skeleton. So the bones of your legs, your pelvis, the spine in particular at this point, the rib cage to a certain extent, are a bit like a plant in water, just swaying forwards and backwards. And the image of the water obviously provides a certain density around you, but what's going to stop you just sort of like stumbling forwards like this is a certain amount of restraint from certain parts of your body, and those parts of your body would tend to extend out. And so long as we don't actively try and push ourselves forwards, then, you know, so long as we're not resisting the movement, then like the cables of a bridge or the guy ropes of a tent, unless there's other factors involved, they'll just naturally draw you back. So we set up a rhythm, a flow between these two opposite movements, and this is an idea that, to my mind, fits very nicely with the idea of how muscles work. Because if I do this, then certain muscles are contracting, others are expanding, and then to do this, the muscles that have expanded contract, and so on and so forth. So this is a phenomenon we can actually observe at work within our bodies if we're paying attention. And we can bring our arms into the movement. Hands are palmed forwards. And as you go forward, you leave your hands behind a little bit. And in this position, I'm exaggerating here, by the way, just so you can see what it is I'm doing. In this position, where are the extensions? Where do you feel the opening in your body? The muscles being drawn out, the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments being drawn out. And then as you go and settle down, the balls of your feet, those areas contract, and that brings your arms through. And the same thing going back. So think of this in 4 stages. 1, you rock forwards. 2, your arms come forwards. 3, you rock back. 4, your arms come back. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oops, I've gone too far. That is a regular part of practice. Remember, when we're practicing something, when we're trying, especially if we're trying something new, you're going to overshoot. There's always a certain amount of trial and error. We can learn from that. And then those stages, rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1, you go forwards, and after a little while 2 begins to move, 2's carrying on, but 3's beginning to start. So they overlap, and we start to get the flow back, but we're more aware of the individual components, and it will actually, it actually makes the flow much more sustainable, because we've taken a good close look at certain elements. When we break movements like this down, I always think it's a bit like if I'm going to service my bike, and what I do is take parts off, clean them up, make sure they're working properly, and then put them all back together so that they work together much better. And it's a sort of process of analysis in Tai Chi. And whilst it's not the only way and the only thing that we do in practice in Tai Chi, that understanding that builds from that is actually a key part of our progress in the art. And it can be a very personal thing, of course, because what you're observing and what I'm observing may well be slightly different. So as we observe something, there's always a consideration: is what we're doing there useful? Is it adding to the movement? Is it moving the whole process onwards? Or is it actually somehow blocking? Is it an old habit that we've picked up somewhere? So this is a good exercise to sort of practice those kind of considerations. Don't ignore the sensations in your arms and hands and fingers. And then go back towards your heels. And as you come forwards again, you reach that point just behind the balls of your feet where you want the weight to be sort of centered. And instead of just letting the arms come through or maybe tilting forward, you let your hips drop back in this way of sinking down. And as you do that, just let your hands curve under into the exercise routine down. But with that same awareness that you've begun to develop in that first exercise. As always, one of the key things that we do is develop these ideas, these powers of observation, the skills, in as simpler form as possible. When obviously that's not an approach unique to Tai Chi, but we don't want to get so caught up with complicated movements that we ignore the value of the practice of very, very simple movements to establish basic principles. You might liken it to a musician playing scales. I can't remember who it was. There was a very famous musician, guitarist. But he was a classical guitarist, but it wasn't John Williams. He was talking about every day he would practice his basic scales, C and whatever, the exact same scales that if you were beginning playing guitar, you would find in the first page of the book. And he just practiced them every day because he said, they're the foundation for what I do. And he just wanted to make sure that he kept them sharp. Hands out to your sides. So it's very easy to get a bit distracted by fancy movements and the complexities of the movements, especially if you're trying to learn a form or something like that. And it's always quite interesting for me. I think, you know, when I go to one of my teachers, when there were beginners in the group, because the teachers would tend to go right back to the basics, and quite often I find myself going, oh yeah, that's interesting. Either I've never heard it before, or you know, I've just taken it for granted, or something like that. So a useful question would be, you know, what's happening within my body when I do the wild goose? It's a simple enough movement, one that you're all familiar with. Which parts of the body expand? Which parts of the body contract as you go through the movement? And is it helpful? Is it adding to the movement, or is it just extra? Do you need to do that? Or is it worse than that, in the sense, is it blocking the movement? So, for instance, if I come closer, I might think, well, okay, if I lift my shoulder, my arm comes up. I think, well, is that useful? Well, actually, no, because it's quite sore. It's quite tight there. So I think, well, okay, in that case, I'll try and keep my shoulder down, and you have the intent to keep the shoulder down. On the other hand, you might think, well, the expansion in the solar plexus, and you think, yeah, that's a connection that is quite useful. Another useful thing about this way of approaching the movements is that it really does help to keep your attention focused. It gives that active part of our brains, the thinking part, something really detailed to think about. And part in the clouds. And these small changes, as I've noted before, these small changes and movements within our body are the ones far more likely to respond to imagery, memory, all aspects of our intent. So it becomes a very deep mind-body connection, body-mind connection. And we begin to get a sense for how our awareness, our trained awareness, works with the body and with the movement, with the energy. A dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And those three elements, body, mind, and energy, sometimes referred to as the three treasures or the three jewels. Sometimes it's presented, you know, that it's almost suggested that the intent comes first. But to my mind, they're much more interdependent. I think of them as being like the three legs of a tripod. Each one supports and is supported by the other two. Or you get three poles, and you form a pyramid shape with them. And again, each pole is supported by the other two, but also supports the other two. And according to the circumstances, according to what's going on for you and what you're trying to achieve at that particular time, and what you're trying to respond to at that particular time, you might well find that you're emphasizing one aspect or another. But in terms of your practice, you want to be able to draw on those three elements at need. So it's a good idea to try and train all of them. One more time. And then changing. I sometimes liken this to driving a car. You know, if you get in the car and drive it, you've got the mechanics of the car, the bodywork and the wheels and the engine, whatever else. I don't really know that much about cars, but, and you put petrol in the car to get it to move, to give it the energy. And there's a driver. And if you take any of those elements out, you can have a great looking car. If there's no petrol, it's not going to go anywhere. On the other hand, if you've got a beaten up old car like I've got and it leaks a bit, you can put petrol in and it just leaks out. So yeah. Now changing. And if it's comfortable, add in the turn. And then on the other side. And again, if it's comfortable, the turn. And row the boat in the middle of the lake. And polishing the table. One more to our other side. And progressing in Tai Chi, if that's what we wish to do, isn't just a case of learning more movements. There is an element of learning more movements, and sometimes a new movement can cast a light on your existing practice you haven't come across before. But it's also about how you're doing in existing movements. So the kind of understanding that I'm talking about really is part of the sort of pathway that takes us beyond the initial stages of Tai Chi, developing that understanding, and trying to get a sense for what the words mean, the words of the classics, the words of our teachers, and so on and so forth. It's important to realize that actually there's a lot of very poor translations out there. A term like chi, for instance, has been around for about 2,000 years. So if you go back to the original term chi, it's a bit like trying to understand Chaucer in its original form. It'd be very difficult to understand, quite hard to say, give a kind of definite, this is what it means. So the terms have evolved and changed. One of the useful things can be, and it's not universal, but that the way the Chinese language has evolved as a series of characters, the pictures change, they get added to sometimes. I'm by no means expert in this. Everything I know I picked up from other people. But the term Qigong, for instance, leaving the Qi aside for the moment, the term Gong or Kung, and we find it in Kung Fu, Gong Fu as well. I found out fairly recently part of the character for Gong is a wooden plough. So, you know, one of the things that they would have probably put behind an ox or something like that and ploughed a field with. That's quite a strong image. I mean, I've never actually done it, but I can imagine that trying to plough a straight line through muddy soil. And I've seen people do it at displays and things like that. Actually, it would be jolly hard work. As I say, I've never done it. I don't know, but I mean, I think it's reasonable to assume that. So, you know, we realise from that if we're practicing qigong, then actually something that is going to be that kind of a strong type of work suggested by that image. So, you know, when we're doing Part in the Clouds, it's lovely to think, you know, oh, Part in the Clouds, isn't that nice? But we can get a bit kind of airy that, hold on, this is not ploughing the field. This is wandering all over the place. It's not going to help the crops grow. We want to come back to those kind of images and that very close view of the body that I was suggesting. Without that, then it becomes very fuzzy, I think. And so again, we want to find a balance. I'm not saying it's all about that by any means, but there needs to be an element of gong in our practice if we're going to actually take this practice forwards at all. Okay, so from the parallel stance, go into a slightly wider stance and begin to transfer your weight from side to side. Letting your hips drop down. So if this isn't making your legs ache, you're not working hard enough. I get down here, I can feel my thigh muscles engaging. And that's the gong, that's ploughing the field. Go into your left leg and turn, into your right leg and turn, and have your hands in front of you. Then I've used this image with you all before, I think. So, this is an image of carrying a bowl of water, perhaps, a tray of drinks. The other image that I think is quite good is like when you're in the supermarket, you're pushing the supermarket trolley. We've all done it, haven't we? Walking down the supermarket aisle and somebody's trying to get past. So you do this, you just use your arms, and suddenly there's this kind of tangle of people and trolleys, because the things go all over the place. You have to move your whole body across. You're not actually using your arms. So this is, whichever image you're using, this is a good image to take into account when we're, say, doing some of the complicated movements or the forms, to give us the sense of how the arms always feel. And remember, again, the big muscles of the arms, they have that softness. There's a sense, as I come across here, that slight pull, which suggests that there's a movement around the muscles, an energy flow around the muscles, if you like. Now, if you're doing this correctly, you're turning and you'll be facing the same way that your foot is pointing. You go across, you turn. Notice where my hands are. They're not out there, but my elbows are just resting against my sides. Now watch. I go into this leg here. See where my hand is? If I raise that hand up to shoulder height and I simply turn the other hand palm down, I'm in part the wild horse's mane. You see how little I've done? I'll show you on the other side. I come across, I turn, my hand comes up and down. So part of the wild horse's mane is not this, it's a very precise and a very clear movement. So try this. Go into your left, turn, and simply raise your hand to shoulder height. That's the only independent movement that your arm needs to make, and the other hand turns palm down. And try on the other side, go across and turn. So your weight should be in your right leg, and raise, turn the other hand palm down. This time, move back into your left leg, turn, and again, we're just drawing this arm across. Remember that feeling that we get when we do this exercise. See if you can find that again here. Turn your hands palm in, move back into your right leg and turn to your right. And part the wild horse's mane. So as you do this, thinking back to the questions I posed when we were doing the wild goose and part the clouds, which parts of your body are expanding? Which parts of your body are contracting? Which parts of your body would you want to bring your intent to in order to produce this movement and to make it better, to make it more complete, so that even your arm rising up isn't isolated? There's an expansion somewhere in your body. I would say here in my sides. And this, again, this will take the notion of the whole body engaged in the movement, the whole body mind engaged in the movement to a new level. Don't forget to transfer your weight, turn in the center. The movement starts to feel not just flowing, but also very quiet. It has, if you've ever seen the photographs, or you've ever seen what's sometimes referred to as the Zen gardens, there's just a whole sort of garden of pebbles with just one plant in the middle of it, and Tai Chi has that simple thread running through it. The great players of this art are beautifully clear in their movements. This inevitably takes us into areas of energy flow, and sometimes people will pose the question: can you move the energy to the places where you want it to go? And this again comes out of that trinity of body, mind, and energy, and how they support each other. Because the mind must be very, very clear if it's going to send the energy to, say, your fingertips. You've got to know where your fingertips are. You've got to know where the energy is coming from. Otherwise, frankly, it's a bit wishful. It's also hugely significant in the martial aspect of Tai Chi, because it means that we're able to produce the movement that we want to move when it's needed, not a split second afterwards. And in part that comes from this very close looking at what's happening within the body. Actually means that you're very much in the moment. So not only does it relate to the martial side of it, but it relates to the meditational side of it as well. And this is what I mean about these three elements reinforcing each other. Good. And shake out. So this is how I would approach progressing in these arts, not just by accumulating movements. I've done plenty of that, and that can be very interesting. But it's not. Oh, I'm an advanced Tai Chi player because I know this form and this form and this form and this form and this form. And generally speaking, the people that I know who do Tai Chi are quite dismissive of that. It's like, so what? Can you actually do the form? And can you really make it work? I remember some years ago doing a seminar with a great American martial artist called Rick Fay, who was saying about these people in particular who produce sort of like 20 volumes of DVDs about their methods. And he said, all you need to do is buy the first one, because if the method's any good, then the details will all be in those very, very basic movements. The rest is, I mean, he was implying that the rest was just about making money, because it's rehashing the same things. So 1 foot forwards, the simple transfer of your weight can come alive and fresh if you bring that quality of attention to it. If you're just standing there, half asleep, a little bit bored, wondering when we're going to get on with the real stuff, you may miss something really key. So we're constantly bringing our attention back to a point of focus. And we do that by listening to the body, by observing the body. So if I go back and I'm talking to you, so I might lose attention and my body drifts over and suddenly I'm out here. It's like, oops, that's wrong, I correct. And in that moment of correction is the moment of returning your attention to your body and to this moment. Sinking back, raising your toes, the more of your weight goes down. And in that moment of settling, and again, I've talked about this idea of the punctuation in the sentence. Again, are your hips level? Is the pelvis hanging down? Have you stiffened up somewhere? Are you leaning? Stepping in. Try and do this with just a few moments of your leg resting in the air. And without any of this, it's not this, nice and loose in your arms and your shoulders. And when you move your leg, feel what's happening in the muscles of the legs, how they're operating. Because your leg will feel a little bit like your arm was feeling when we were swinging the arms around. So your other foot forwards. There's a Chinese saying that is often applied to Tai Chi. I'm told it's Chinese anyway. More is less and less is more. And it was interesting. In some of my Qigong classes, if I happen to have a class where there's not many people there, but all the people there are quite experienced, I sometimes do what I'm doing with you. I'll kind of give more detail. I won't do it if there's beginners there, because they're not kind of in a position to appreciate that. But the interesting thing there is that somebody said to me once after one of those classes, she said, whenever there's a small group of us, you do less exercises and you work as harder. And I ache more. And I hadn't really thought about it. But sometimes, if there's a small group and you think, well, let's not know the exercises, I can go down a layer in this. And I end up doing less exercises. It looks like I'm going to end up doing less exercises in this class as well. raising your toes and your heel. What's happening in the supporting leg as more of the weight goes in? Is there a resistance? Is your knee, your ankle, your hip tightening? Or can you feel the increased pressure in the sole of your foot, just behind the ball of your foot? Stepping in. Don't tighten up in your back. Don't tighten up in your arms. Imagine you're carrying a tray of drinks. You don't want any shaking. Otherwise, you're going to spill the drinks. And then stepping through. And then in the other direction. And then straighten up. I remember spending a day with one of my teachers, and my teacher in Chen Star Corral, and it was an advanced group, and it was about it was about the whole form, and we knew the form, or thought we knew the form. It's a 72 move form. We spent the entire morning on the first 4 movements. We spent half the afternoon on the first 4 movements. In the end, even his wife, who knows him well, was saying to him, do you think we might do a bit more? And Quill just saying, just wait, just wait, just wait. And at the end of the day, we went through the whole form. It's the best I've ever done of the entire form. So this approach in Tai Chi really is a valuable one. Stand with your feet parallel, holding the tray of drinks. Turn one foot out and take some steps. You don't want to spill the drinks. If you spill the drinks, then you'll have to learn the mop and bucket form, of course. Your arms shouldn't be tight. They should be loose. You should be. Don't hold your fingers rigid. They're loose. You can wriggle your fingers around. You can feel the muscles and so on and so forth. Change direction if you haven't done so already. Finish with your left foot forwards. Turn your body, going into wind blows the willows. You can imagine you've got a full glass in each hand and you're not going to spill it. I know that changes the shape of the hand slightly, but it's really about that quality of movement. Where are you feeling the changes in your body? And if you can feel the change in your body in one part of your body, chances are, I think almost entirely really, there'll be the opposite change somewhere else in your body. Because there may be a point, I wouldn't like to say that is always the case, but it's mostly the case. raising your toes, bringing your foot in, raising your knee, rotating your hip. In fact, the raising of the knee is also a rotation of your hip. You bring the foot in, you rotate your hip vertically, you bring the knee up horizontally to produce the shape. Both those actions, all of those actions are ones that may cause you to get to here and kind of go like this. And in which case, once again, you're back to the mop and bucket form because you spilled the drinks. Remember that quiet quality. A focused, trained attention here will help you because you know how it can feel with the simple exercises, and you can direct that memory through your intent. But an unfocused attention, a distraction, will have you wobbling around. And then on the other side, starting with Wind Blows the Willows. I'm hoping with all of you that your stance is brilliant. Is it? Is it hip width? Is it long enough to give you the movement and the freedom in your hips that you need for this exercise? And I know somebody gave me the thumbs up there, but I don't believe you. I bet if I was in the room with you, I could find something. A good Tai Chi teacher can always find something. And then coming through. And again, just for a moment, hang there. Once the leg is up, hips are dropping back, nice and comfortable. I can bounce in my hip and my fingers move. Be careful with that. I don't want you wrecking your knees. It's like, oh, look, my hands. See how my hands, if they're rigid, that's not going to happen. And then stepping through, dragonfly skims the water. And stepping back. Remember, hips hanging back. And then bring your feet out. Good. Open your hands together. Oops. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, the arm. The other side. Into your back. around your hips. And onto your belly. And the upper part of your chest. So this approach gives us more options, more freedom. When I've talked before about embrace tiger, return to mountain, and I've suggested to you, what is it that brings you back in those moments when you need to, in the frustration of the supermarket queue or the traffic jam, or that little friction at work or with your friends, or I mean those little things that happen to us most days. But if we think about this trinity, body, mind, and energy, as working together, then we have three options to both detect what is going on and also to remedy that. Why am I standing here in the supermarket queue with my back aching? Yeah. Why do I feel frustrated at this situation? Can be the early warning signs that, oh, actually, no, this is going wrong, but you can change that, and you can deal with that. So, people sometimes say to me they're only interested in the energy. I had somebody say that to me once, and I asked her how she got to the class, and she said she drove. And I said, well, do you have a car? She said, well, yes. I said, well, when you go to the garage, do you put the petrol in the car, or do you spray it all over the garage floor? She said, well, I put it in the car. So the energy's got to have something to surround it, to shape it. You can't get away from this. If your idea is to think, well, I want to go further with this practice, then all three elements have to be worked on. It sounds a bit of a drag, doesn't it? I mean, actually, the truth is, if you want to develop at Tai Chi, then the amount of time you spend practicing has to increase. I say to beginners, just start off with 5 minutes, and that's great. Then you can feel better for doing it, and you can carry on doing that. But there's a ceiling to that, and you have to be quite discriminatory in sometimes about your practice. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. You're sinking down. You feel the springiness in your legs, producing the energy to push you up. But already gravity is drawing on your hips. They start to go down. They draw your shoulders down. They draw your elbows down. They draw your hands in. And you quite naturally arrive back at the mountain. So the great thing about this for me is that the thing that brings me back to the mountain, ideally, and I'm not claiming to be able to do this all the time by any means, it's an aspiration, but the thing that could bring me back to the mountain again and again and again is one of the few very consistent things in my life, which is the pull of gravity. And stand. Feeling that pull in your hips, the feeling the lower back, hips, buttocks overhanging, soften your knees and your ankles. The body supported by your legs, the front of your body supported by your back. And then just shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. If you enjoyed that,